Well, hello. I seem a little hot. Drop me just a little bit. Two things before I get started. One, I don't know if you ever see, this is in the bulletin every time. It says bible.com/events/this week, 489-41238. If you type that into your browser or your phone, it'll actually pull up the notes for the day's sermon. If you want to follow along in the notes and fill in the blanks and read the scriptures or whatever, it's there. It's there every week. I just don't print it out every week. But anyway, print it out this week. Second, some of you guys, I like to keep everybody up to date on the current events, what's coming, what's important. And some of you, like Barry, is a huge movie buff. Would you scoot over so your wife can sit next to you, Barry? I'm here to help. And so Barry likes to know, a lot of you movie buffs, you like to know what movies are coming, what the big ones are, and you plan ahead. You're already scheduling stuff. So I want to make sure all of you know, online and here in the auditorium, that the Barbie movie is coming next July. End of July, July 21st, I believe, is the scheduled date. And I know some of you want to go ahead and put that on your calendar so you're ready. But I'm guessing some of you have a different question, not the date of the movie. You're looking at the picture, and you're going, what is Ryan Gosling thinking? Or more specifically, the man has all the money he's ever going to need. He is hot enough, he can pick and choose any movie script he wants on earth right now. Producers, directors are begging Ryan Gosling to be in their movies. So why did he agree to dress like this, where literally millions of people would see him? What was going through his brain? Well, he actually answered that question. Jimmy Fallon asked him that question. This is kind of hard-hitting Bible stuff you don't get a lot of places, but Jimmy Fallon asked him the question, why? And so when he asked him, the first thing he said is what every movie star says every time. I read the script, and it was one of the greatest scripts I've ever read in my life. For the Barbie movie, the greatest script. And so I'm sure that was a little bit of hyperbole on his part. But then he said, now Ryan Gosling, if you don't know this, I didn't know this, he's got daughters, young daughters. And do you know what comes with young daughters? Those of you who have young daughters, do you know what young daughters always have? Barbies. In my house, we had 3 daughters, so if they were growing up, anybody ever step on a Lego? You know, you stepped on Legos. That was occasional. The constant danger was stepping on a Barbie, because there are some sharp edges, you can figure out where, on Barbies. So Ryan Gosling reads the script, likes the script a lot, obviously probably liked the number that was attached to the script as well, and he walks out in the yard, and he looks down, and he says, I walk out in the backyard, and you know where I found Ken? Face down in the mud next to a squished lemon. And he finishes and says, and at that moment I said, his story needs to be told. So Ryan Gosling is doing the Barbie movie because he got a sign from above, because as he's making the decision, there is a sign. And a lot of us, when we're making decisions, we're looking for signs and circumstances and feelings. And we're trying to bring those things together. Maybe God's going to communicate through a sign, or boy, did God organize the circumstances just right, or I just have a feeling. And we're doing a series right now called What I Learned on My Summer Sabbatical. And each place we're going, I'm talking about certain places we went. And one of the things that we got to do, we were very blessed with this, we got to go to Israel. Somebody actually bought us a trip to Israel, which was amazing. And so Kim and I were in Israel. And let me just show you a little bit of something. It's slideshow time. We're in Israel, and we're down near the Dead Sea. And there's an area called Qumran, the Qumran community. The Qumran community is the one that created the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if you're a geek, you can look that up and you know about it. If you're not a geek, you'll be bored. So I'm not going to say anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls, except we were where they made the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we're up on a hilltop with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we look out, and there is a cave right here. See the cave right there? And I don't have good eyesight, so I couldn't see it. But some of the people in the group looked and said, hey, I think there's something in the cave. And one of them had a really good camera, and they zoomed in. And in the cave were at least 2 ibexes in that cave. Now, an ibex looks like this. Ibexes are kind of a little deer in the Bible. If you read about mountain goats or wild goats, they're talking about ibexes. They're little things like this tall. And somehow, a couple of ibexes had gotten there. And it's like 30 feet from here to there, and somehow they'd gotten into that cave. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive. It's pretty impressive. When we finished up in the area right there, we went up the road just a little bit, still in the Dead Sea region, and we went to a place called En-Gedi. And in En-Gedi, there were a couple of cool things. One was this waterfall. You don't think of waterfalls in Israel, but the valley that we went up to get there was this not real pretty waterfall in En-Gedi. And don't look at the white, pale, fat man under the waterfall. It's not me. And B, you're going, why did you take a picture while there was a white, pale, fat man under the waterfall? I was waiting to get a picture when there wasn't. And before he got tired of being there, another pale, fat, white guy came and sat next to him. So I assume there is some religious significance in pale, fat, white guys sit under the waterfall to get a blessing from God or something. And so I just gave up and moved on. And that was free. The real important part was this picture here, or a lot of pictures like this. And you may not be able to see it very clearly, but there are caves. Remember that cave I showed you that had the ibexes in it? Up and down that valley, there are caves. Every little hole you see is a cave. And some of the caves are tiny, and some are big, but the entire wall of that valley is just covered in caves. And as I'm looking at it, it reminded me of one of my favorite events in the Bible. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is in 1 Samuel chapter 24. And I'm going to read you, we're going to work our way through that chapter today, because this made me think of it, and there's a lot to do with what Barbie and Ken will figure in to this, trust me. So, in 1 Samuel 24, I'll give you some historical background. I've given you geographical background. Let me give you historical background. Saul is the king of Israel. He has screwed up so much that God has announced he will no longer be king of Israel once he dies. That once he dies, the kingship will pass to another family. And we already know who the family is because Samuel, the prophet, has anointed David to be the next king. And unfortunately for David, Saul figured it out. And Saul starts chasing David through the wilderness. David runs away, hides. He ends up gathering a group of about 600 men with him who are kind of scoundrelly guys, and they are hiding in the wilderness from Saul. And every time Saul gets a break from king stuff, he gets some men together, and he goes after David. And so we come to 1 Samuel 24. It says, after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, after he had to do king stuff and fight a war, he was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi. Hey, I mentioned En-Gedi, okay? So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Crags of the wild goats. Hey, we saw those. Cool, huh? And so Saul has 3,000 of his best soldiers. David has 600 scoundrels. And they come to this valley right here. And Saul has enough information to know David is probably in the valley somewhere or in a nearby valley. That somewhere in this area near the Dead Sea, David is there and Saul is looking for him. And then the next verse says that Saul came to the sheep pens along the way. So there's a bunch of sheep pens because they're grazing sheep. And a cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now your translation may say cover his feet, which gives you a real good picture of what kind of relieving himself he's doing. Just to put it in perspective, ladies, in case you didn't know this, dudes won't go into a cave to do number one. Any good tree will work for that. A cave means number two. So Saul sees one of these hundreds of caves, hundreds, and he picks one and he scampers up a few feet 6, 8, 10 feet up the ground, which anybody could do easily, who lives over there. Goes in to take care of business. Now, let me just ask one housekeeping question. If you are in a cave taking care of covering your feet, which direction are you going to face? You're going to face toward the light. Because as far as you know, the cave is empty, and any bad thing come from the front. If anybody comes in, you got to say, occupied. You got to be ready for that. All right, I'm in here, be out in a minute. You got to be ready. So he's in there in as compromised a position as he can be, facing the front of the cave, and then the next phrase says David and his men were far back in the cave. Now, let me ask a couple of things. If you think it through, you might be going, that's weird. There's 600 people in this cave? We don't know that. It says David and his men. It doesn't say David and all his men. He might have had the 600 men scattered. I don't know the answer to that part of it. He may have had a dozen men in the cave with him. So I don't know how big the cave was. I'm not going to say all 600 are necessarily there. But there's a handful at least, and they're in the cave, and you're going, okay, why didn't Saul hear them? Remember earlier it said they were all around the sheep pens. You ever been around sheep pens? You don't need to go around sheep pens to know what sheep pens sound like, right? They're noisy. So there's all kinds of noise coming from the front of the cave. In the front door is a constant bang. So a little noise in the back is not going to get his attention. So Saul is in a compromised position, and David is in the cave with him. And this is where it hit me, was like all these caves, and Saul picked the one David and his men were in. What are the odds? What are the odds in all the Dead Sea region that Saul will pick David's cave to use as a bathroom? Wow. Those circumstances are amazing. This is probably a sign from God. And that's what David's men say to him. The men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. This is obviously a sign from God. The circumstances are too overwhelming. You need to crawl up and kill the man who's trying to kill you. And then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now it says corner means David's not like me. Because if I'd have crawled up and decided I should cut off a piece of his robe, I wouldn't have cut off a corner. I'd have cut off a different section. But that's just me. Now, two things you may be thinking. Okay, David crawled up, and while he's crawling, he's thinking, should I kill him? Should I kill him? He brought a knife for some reason. Should I kill him? Should I kill him? Should I kill him? And once he decided not to, he cut off the robe, and so it was a very innocent thing, and he decided not to kill him. Well, two things. Number one, cutting off a corner of the robe was a big deal because robes were symbolic. Robes meant something. Matter of fact, if we go back to when Saul was rejected as king, when Saul got fired from the job, given his, 7 years notice, Samuel the prophet said to him, you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. And as Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one who's better than you. So tearing the robe was symbolic. And it is possible. Now, I don't know. There's two ways this could have played out in David's mind, and David's not here to ask. So we kind of can speculate two different ways. One way is David's crawling forward. He's thinking about taking out Saul. He gets up there, realizes he shouldn't do it, so he cuts off just a corner and he sneaks back. The second is David's crawling up, and Saul was a very big man, a very good fighter. And David was not a big person. And David may have crawled forward and cut off the robe as a symbol that he's taking the authority. The authority is now mine. And he's crawling back, and he's then going to send his men forward to overpower and kill Saul. That is possibly what David was thinking. We don't know. Because when he gets back to where his men are, afterward David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe, and said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him. In other words, he realized, I'm not supposed to do that. For Saul is the anointed of the Lord. And with this, David sharply rebuked his men. He's the anointed of the Lord. God has anointed him to be king for this moment. And while I am anointed to be king for the next moment, it's not my decision when the moment of transition occurs. I don't have the authority to choose for God when I become king. Pretty amazing, isn't it? And so David did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went his way. And when I think of this decision that David made and the circumstances, all those caves, how easy it would have been for David to talk himself into killing Saul, because the circumstances were overwhelming. But he didn't. See, circumstances can tempt us to ignore principles if we lack trust. And this was a trust test for David. Do you trust God? Or are you going to take matters into your own hands? And David chose the right one, which gives us the first point. We're talking about circumstances today. Don't let circumstances overrule principles. A lot of times, circumstances will be leaning a certain way. And I know people, and we're all tempted to do it. I should do this. I should jump ahead of God's plan. I should step outside of God's principles to do what I think needs to be done. And let me cover the three areas. I'm talking circumstances. I'm really talking about three different things. There's circumstances like this, where the circumstances just line up a certain way, and that way may or may not align with God's principles. There's also what we call signs. And David's guys are saying, this is a sign. This is a sign. A sign's bigger than circumstances. A sign is like, wow, there's a Kindle in the mud in my yard. All right, there is a sign. And the other one is feelings. Sometimes we make it say, why'd you decide that? Well, it just didn't feel right, or it felt like I needed to do it. I just had a feeling. Now, I don't want to discount feelings. Okay? Because sometimes a feeling that you get is because your subconscious has almost noticed something and your brain, your conscious, hasn't caught up with it yet. Like if you've been around an abusive person, you very well might walk into the presence of an abusive person and pick up on it faster than your partner, than anybody, whoever you're else with. You might get it faster. You might be going, there's something wrong with that guy. There is something wrong with that guy. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what it is. There's something wrong with that guy. And I'm not saying to ignore those. Because a lot of times those feelings like that are because, like I said, your subconscious is catching all the clues, but your conscious hasn't put them all together yet. Okay? So don't disregard your feelings, but your feelings are circumstances. And sometimes those feelings are things like fear. Sometimes it's like a desire for comfort. That feeling is you see a situation and you're like, well, if I go over and do this, it will make me uncomfortable. It'll take me out of my comfort space. And so you have a feeling you don't want to do it. Sometimes feelings are what I call voices. I don't mean like you need to take medication voices, but almost all of us have voices from our past that still speak into our lives now. A lot of us, when we're making decisions, our mother's voice or our father's voice or a teacher's voice or an old leader's voice, we'll hear what that person said. That person may have said something to us that makes us doubt our abilities. And so we hit a situation, we're trying to make a decision, and the voice we hear is that other person's voice. It's not the voice of God, it's just a circumstance. So circumstances and feelings and signs are part of the decisions, but you can't let them overrule everything else. So you mind if I just take a few minutes and we walk through how to make good decisions? Is that okay? Just biblically, how do I make a good decision? How do I balance all this stuff out? And I got three components of good decisions. Okay? And the first component is biblical principles. That's number one. What do I know from the Bible about this situation? David knew from the Bible that Saul was the anointed. He knew from the teaching of God that Saul was the anointed, and it was wrong to take out God's anointed. Later on, probably David wrote Psalm 119, "Give me understanding, and I will obey your instructions. I will put them into practice with all my heart." And it's really important. Can I tell you this? If you're a Christian, this is crucial, right? You want to obey God's principles. You want to follow God's principles. Do you know if you're not a Christian, you still need to pay attention to God's principles? Whether you agree with me or not? Because the Bible's principles are an expression of God's nature. The Bible is the revelation of God, which means it reveals his nature. So when there's a principle in there, it's not just people have this idea that somehow God's principles, the things that are in the Bible, are just God coming up with rules. God just saying, "God, what kind of rules should we have for our club? Let's don't commit adultery. Let's put that in the rules for the club. Okay, we're not going to commit adultery in our club." And we have this idea that's just a bunch of rules God made up. But the reality is all of God's principles, all of his rules, all of his commandments, whatever you want to put there, laws, whatever, are reflections of his nature. So when God says don't commit adultery, he's not coming up with a rule for us to follow abstractly out of the blue. He's saying, I am a faithful person. I keep my promises. I want you to do the same thing. Because life works better if you live according to my principles that reflect my nature. So it's always better for you to stick to God's principles. Even if you don't believe the Bible, you're better off following God's principles. I'll tell you that right front. If you don't believe, you don't have a relationship with Christ, if you're going, I'm not sure about this whole Christ thing, just try living God's principles for a while and see if your life doesn't get better. Because, number one, they reflect his principles. But you know what else reflects God's nature? Creation is a reflection of God's nature. You live in creation. So creation is built on the blueprint of God's principles and his nature. If you live according to God's standards, your life will go better in general because it just works better when you go with the flow of creation according to his nature. That's that first piece, okay? So, 3 components of good decisions, biblical principles. The next one, this is common sense. Common sense. Some people call it wisdom, which is the right word for it, but I like common sense because wisdom sounds high and crazy. But common sense means things that sound stupid, you ready, are usually stupid. I'm allowed to say that, kids, because I get the mic. Okay. Things that sound stupid are usually stupid. And a lot of times, we seem to skip the common sense part of the problem. Here's something really, it's out of Proverbs chapter 30. It says, ants, they aren't strong, but store up food for the winter. And the point is, it's just common sense. Winter's coming, you probably should get ready. Okay, this is deep theology, right? Winter's coming, you can't get food in winter. We should probably take some of what we get in the summer and save it. Wow, heavy theology. My goodness, how could you possibly come up with that without spending years of theological Yeah, it's just common sense. And so you take the biblical principles, you take common sense, and then when it gets to challenging things, you throw in some good counsel. Talking to people who know what they're talking about. People who give you wisdom. Proverbs 20 says plans succeed through good counsel. Now you'll notice common sense could have told David to kill Saul. The counsel he was getting was telling him to kill Saul, but it wasn't good counsel and David knew it. How did he know it? Well, here's what it says when it describes how David got his crew together. It says, others began coming, men who were in trouble or in debt, who were just discontented. You want a list of who not to listen to? People who were in trouble, in debt, or just discontented. I'm not talking about they've got a mortgage. They're in debt to where they ran away. Okay? These are people who fled because of debt. These are people who are fled because of trouble, and these people are discontented. These are not the people you want to listen to for counsel. David had around him a group that were good for fighting battles, but you didn't want to listen to them about anything. Not even a good restaurant. Don't even listen about restaurants. No, nothing. And if you look and you see people who are in trouble, in debt, or discontented, those aren't good people. So David says he gathered 400 of them, eventually came 600. And these are the dudes who said to him, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I'll give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Because this is basic, this is deep stuff. This is deep stuff, but I want to make sure you get the deep stuff. You'll rarely get wisdom from fools. You will rarely get wisdom from fools. So now let me take a little bit longer and let's talk about who are you listening to and who should you be listening to. Because I have basically 4 kinds of friends that I see us having that we could listen to, 4 kinds of people. The first one are sign friends. They're totally dependent on circumstances, not principles. They're the ones who do everything because they feel it. Barry and I talk about this one person who came to our church. She was really nice, but my gosh, was she a sign person. She got up every morning, and it was like she picked her breakfast cereal based on the signs God gave her that morning. It was like, oh my God. And some people, they're just always, well, the parking spot opened up, so I figured God wanted me to go in the strip club. I never heard anybody say that. I made that one up on the spot. Don't freak out. Just seemed like a reasonable illustration, okay? So you've got sign friends. You've got some people. There's nothing wrong with having these people as friends. It's good to have friends who are all over the place. If you've got a friend who's a sign friend who's always, it's okay to have them as friends. Just don't listen to them when the chips are down, okay? Just understand these are the friends who are, these are your have fun with friends, not your make big decision friends, okay? That's what they are. You've also got your cynical friends. And your cynical friends make decisions without faith entering into them at all. They don't have a faith component to their lives. I know Christians who are cynical. I can be a little bit that way myself sometimes. And they just don't bring faith into the equation when they're making decisions. So these people recognize that's a good person. When I'm analyzing a situation, they might be helpful, but I got to make sure somebody brings some faith into it so I'm making a godly decision and not just a logical decision. And then I've got my narrow friends. They lack perspective or nuance. You've all heard the thing, if only tool you've got's a hammer, you treat every problem like a nail. You've got certain people in your life who they've only got one principle, and that's all they think about. You might have a friend who's a fitness fanatic, and every problem, the cure is you just need to get in better shape. You need to start running. If you would just start running, it would solve so many of your problems. You just need to start running, okay? But my wife's filing for divorce. Yeah, you need to run. That'll help. That'll clear your mind. You know somebody like that, or the same person. Might even be the same person, the nutrition fiend. Well, look at what you're eating. It's no wonder your wife wants to leave you. And it's like they've only got one thing. And so you got to watch those people because you know what they're going to tell you. If you ask for counsel, they're going to say, you need to run more and eat better. Everything, okay? What you need are some wise friends. They're the people who take God's principles, who can see nuance, see complications, see all the varieties there, and bring some common sense to the table. And here's what you need to do. As we've talked about this, you need to have already been identifying those people so that when you need counsel, you already know who they are. Because if you wait till you're in trouble, you're going to go, and the first person you call, like, I'm going to call, and you call the person, and you end up with one of those sign people, and they're out looking at the stars going, well, the sun's out bright today, so I think that means you should do it. And no, make sure you know who in my life, I have lots of friends. I have friends I could put in every one of those categories. But I have friends that and sometimes certain ones are good for certain things, even if just because I need some careful analysis. A cynical friend is good for that. But when I know, I can tell, I'm not going to, but I can tell you a brief list of people that I know they're wise. And if I go to them, they're going to take the biblical principles, they're going to take some nuance and some common sense, and they're going to give me good advice. And that's, the Bible says, listen to good advice. Okay? So now, let's get back to the story, because there's something else about circumstances that's really, really important to get out of this same story. Because David sneaks up, cuts the corner of the robe off, goes back to his men. Now what? Can I tell you what my logical, cynical brain says the right answer for next is? Hunker down. Hunker down. At most, I have 600 people with me. At most. Saul has 3,000 of his best soldiers outside the cave. And did I mention in a cave? Anybody in here at all familiar with military strategy? Anybody have any? Who's in a bad position here? Who's in a pray I don't get found position here? David's only course of action from a cynical, logical perspective is hold your breath and don't make any noise and hope Saul doesn't notice he's missing a corner till he gets a few miles down the road. Because if Saul finds out I'm in this cave, he and his 3,000 men just spend the next 15 minutes deciding how to kill us all. You know, we could start a fire at the mouth of the cave. We could start launching arrows. They've got such a great list of things they can do. And you've got nada. And David does this. David walks out to the mouth of the cave. He holds up the corner and he yells, Saul, I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. Well, that's one way to go about this. That's an approach. But look at what happens next. Look at this, what happens. And Saul, from his group of 3,000 men, yelled out and asked, Is that your voice, David, my son? And he wept aloud. You are more righteous than I, he said. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he not let him get away unharmed? In other words, I don't understand. Saul doesn't understand it. Saul's going, if we'd have switched places, I would have garroted you so fast. Then he says, may the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. And then Saul got his men and left. Can I tell you something? This is a hard truth, but I want you to get it. Principled living creates opportunities for impact. If you want to reach the people around you, if you want to have an impact in the people you know in the communities you live in, your principles have to be so deep that you always live them. Peter wrote in the New Testament, if someone asks about your Christian hope, always be ready to explain it. So be ready to tell everybody about why you're a Christian. Great. But then he says, but do this in a gentle and respectful way. Keep your conscience clear. Then if people speak against you, they'll be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. I'm not going to dig into this in really deep. We've already talked about a lot of stuff today. But if you want to impact people's lives, you have to make sure your principles are made of titanium. I don't know how many people, you know people who have rejected Christianity because why? Christians are hypocrites. Christians say they believe this, but then when the circumstances are certain ways, they reject the principles. They can't even live according to their own principles. You want to know a big reason that I'm a pastor, that I'm still a Christian, that I'm a pastor? Because when I was a teenager, I won't give you the details, I watched my dad go through hell because of his faith, because of the way he lived his life. He was a pastor, He was doing things that were reaching people for Christ, and the church was growing, and the people in the church didn't like it, and they eventually fired him. And I watched my dad go through that, and I was in college, and my brain kept asking me, I think God was poking the question into me. I was already a Christian, but I wasn't living it very well. Do you have that kind of faith? And a few months after the church fired my dad, I was in a different college studying to be a pastor. Because my dad lived his principles no matter what the circumstances. And if you want to impact people for Christ, you got to follow your principles. No one will believe we're committed to our principles if circumstances regularly lead us to abandon them. If we can't stay true to them when circumstances point the other direction, nobody's going to listen. We cannot witness, we cannot impact change, we cannot impact people if we don't live them all the time. Okay, one more piece. Because we haven't finished the story exactly. And there's one more really important lesson to pull out of this thing about dealing with circumstances. So circumstances, how we influence decisions. The last thing that the chapter says, then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Now, stronghold is just a fortress, a barricaded area where he could be safe. Now, if this had been a movie, what would have happened? David comes out, waves the corner of the robe. Saul says, man, you're better than me. Let's go back to Jerusalem and celebrate. Let's move you back into the palace. Right? That would be the happy ending. The happy ending, let's all go back to Jerusalem and celebrate the fact that we have reconciled. David says, oh, no, I don't think so. I kind of know who Saul is. If you read the story in 1 Samuel, Saul has thrown spears at him. He's done all kinds of... Saul's crazy. Not in the good way. He's crazy. He's a lunatic. And David knew that eventually Saul would come after him again. So instead of just letting bygones be bygones, see you later, Saul. I'm going to go over to the stronghold. And sure enough, in case you don't know the story, it just takes a few weeks, and Saul's back after David again, trying to kill him. It's just how the story goes. So here's the final thing about circumstances. Trust God, but be wise toward people. See, we can get in trouble on that one because we are people of reconciliation. The Bible says we have been reconciled with Christ, and our job is to reconcile other people to Christ, and doing that involves a lot of times us being reconciled with people. And so if we're doing Christianity right, we are seeking reconciliation. We're always trying to be reconciled to people. But this teaches us, okay, if you're a woman and you're in an abusive relationship, or you're a man in an abusive relationship, you don't go, oh, pastor preached on reconciliation. I'm moving back home today. Can I give you some biblical advice? If you have a husband or a wife who is physically or verbally abusing you, get back to the stronghold. Go somewhere safe. Be safe. Don't be putting yourself in harm's way. The Bible never wants you to actively put yourself in harm's way unless it's as a mission project. Like if God sends you to a hostile community, that's one thing. But as far as going where you live in your house, you are never called to live with an abusive spouse. Get out. And can I throw this in here? Don't let some whiny, crying, I'm so sorry, have any impact. Every abusive person I've ever encountered can apologize better than anybody else. The best apologizers in the world are abusive people. Because they feel really, really bad about it. And that's the cycle. And they feel really, really bad about it. And then the tension rises and it happens again. And the frequency just increases. So if you're listening to me, don't worry about reconciling to your abusive spouse. Write it off. Get out. Okay? So that was free. Important. But we are called to seek reconciliation. Okay? And those situations don't reconcile to somebody who's abusive. We talked about making decisions. We talked about circumstances, biblical principles, and wise counsel. Do not reconcile in one of those situations, in an abusive marriage situation or dating relationship. unless all your counselors are telling you it's okay now. Unless they see the kind of fruit that means long-term change. And so just don't. Okay, that was, just let me share that for you. But, as far as reconciliation goes, there are times we want to be reconciled. We need to keep our wisdom. But what about that family member who you want to reconcile with? You want to restore that relationship, and they don't want to. They just reject you all the time. You try, and they reject. What do you do then? Okay, well, let me tell you a story. Between my junior and senior years in high school, I went to college to take a class in creative writing. And so they put us in a dorm for about a month, and we're taking a class in creative writing. And downstairs in the bottom of the dorm, the last floor, there were vending machines. And there was one, I don't remember what this, I think it was a soda vending machine, but just to make it more interesting, we'll say it was a Mountain Dew vending machine. I can't remember, it's been a long, long time ago, but it was a vending machine, a soda machine, and at the time, this is, I shouldn't tell you this because it points out the fact that I am dirt old. A quarter would get you a soda. Okay, so we're going to translate that to current, and we're going to say $1 would get you a soda. Okay, so this is just to help you understand and write, because if I just say a quarter every time, you're going to go, a quarter for a soda? So we're going to call it $1. And what we recognized very quickly was you put money in the vending machine, and what you got back was absolutely nothing. You could put money in, and the first time, of course, you're an idiot. I'm an idiot. So I put the money in the first time, didn't get anything, say, wonder why. Let's put more money in. So you try 2 or 3 because you really want the soda, and you're really working at it, and you get nothing. So, what do? Well, you quit putting money in the machine. And you write a letter saying, hey, can I get my money back? But there's still only one soda machine, one Mountain Dew option in your building. And you don't want to go a month. So, it's not a bad idea to about once a week, every few days, to go down and see if they fixed it. And how do you tell if they fixed it? You throw a quarter, $1, whatever it is, however old you are to remember how this works. You put some more money in and you push the button, and if nothing happens, what do? You go back upstairs. You put the money in, nothing happens, you just go away. But if you happen to get it, the machine's fixed. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? Not yet, do you? Okay. You've got people in your life right now who are broken vending machines. You want a relationship with them. They don't want a relationship with you. But this is not somebody you worked with 7 years ago. This is somebody who's close to you. They were either very, very close to you for a long time or a family member, and you really, really want that relationship. But they're broken. You've done everything you can do. You've apologized for what you need to apologize for. You've done all the things you should do, and they're not responding at all. So what do? You don't pour all your money into it. You don't call every week. You don't send them an email once a day. But every once in a while, maybe Thanksgiving or their birthday or Christmas, you drop a quarter in. Say happy birthday. Don't press. Don't push. Happy birthday. And you walk away. And you pray that one of these days, when you put the money in, you get a Mountain Dew. That when you put the money in, you say happy birthday. They say, thanks. You know, I kind of miss you. Next time you're in town, why don't we get some coffee? You can't make that happen. You're not a vending machine repair person. Unless you're a vending machine repair person, and then you have to tweak the illustration a little bit. But don't give up because Jesus never gives up. And your willingness to try to reconcile with that person could be the tool God uses to bring that person to Christ or back to Christ. It's possible God can do all kinds of cool things as long as once in a while you put a quarter in a vending machine. If you lose the quarter, you lose the quarter. So that's wisdom. That's how you deal with the people that are hard to deal with. When the circumstances say, I'm not going to get anything back, you don't give up on people. But you throw yourself under the bus to restore a relationship they don't want to have. So that's circumstances. Circumstances figure in our decisions, but they should never overrule principles. Circumstances should never cause us to live away from our principles. We should never, no matter what the circumstances are, betray our values and our principles. And our principle of building and rebuilding and maintaining relationships should never go away, even if we have to put it on hold every once in a while for certain people. I hope this has spoken into some lives. I hope you've gotten something you can take home concrete from this, because I believe the Bible teaches us concrete things on how to live our lives, and our lives are better if we live God's principles. Now, that's a commitment that I have as a person. I'm at the age of my life, the stage in my life where I'm done playing. You'll probably reach that point. I'm done playing. A few years ago, I used to teach in order to draw people. Whatever would make everybody show up. I'm done. I don't want to reach people. I want God to transform people in our ministry. When we put up a sign that says we want you to become the person God created you to be, you know why that's in there? Because that's my heart, that's my passion, that's Pastor Barry's heart, that's his passion, that's our staff's heart, that's our elders' hearts, that's our leaders' hearts. We want you to really become something. I like people coming to church, I really do. But I'm not willing to sacrifice your spiritual development just to make you feel good to show up. That make sense? So we're going to teach you stuff that matters, that makes a difference, so we can make a difference as a church. Do things that really matter, like the Sentinel Challenge, which finances so much of the things we do that matter literally all over the world. And if you've been here for a little bit and you're kind of curious about this church and how it works, what we do to get you started is you can, if you want to, just join a ministry. Just walk up to First Impressions, say, I'd like to be in First Impressions, and the people in the green shirts, they'll figure out how to plug you in. If you want to work in children's ministry, go up to them. They'll give you a background check and train you and plug you in. So that's a perfectly good way. Or if you want to know more, what we do is we call it an orientation chat. An orientation chat, you sit down with me or one of the other church leaders, and we take some time, not a long time. And first thing that I do when I'm doing orientation chat, first thing all of us do, is we just listen to your story. Tell us your path. And then when that's done, we then share the church's path. And then we take a few minutes at the end and we talk about how we can work together to do things that matter. And that's an orientation. It's a great way to get plugged in and started. All you do is email steve@spoutsprings.org and we can get that going, okay? But can I take just a minute as I finish up to just pray for us and our relationships and our decision making? Let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the fact that you want us to make wise decisions, that you use circumstances in our lives, but you don't want us ever to let circumstances rule our lives. That finding a kin in the mud isn't a reason to dress like Ryan Gosling did. But Lord, there are times when you do speak through the circumstances in accord with your principles. Father, for the people who have a broken relationship they want fixed, I pray for healing right now. Father, I pray the next time that some people in this room and some people watching online, the next time they put a quarter in that vending machine, they get a good response. That you will heal some relationships of the people who are part of this group today. And I pray for those who are making hard decisions. I pray they get good counsel, they follow your principles, and they let circumstances figure in as they should. And for all of us, help us to live our principles no matter what, so that we can have an impact in the lives around us and so that you can get glory. It's in Jesus' name I pray.